The foreboding atmosphere of night can be an extremely powerful trigger for some deep-seated irrational fears, because as we all know, when the sun goes down, our worst imaginings come to life. Suffering from acluophobia means having a pathological fear of the dark. Or more accurately, you're terrified of the dangers that you believe lurk within it. This heightened sense of anxiety is something that video games can very easily tease out of you. The very first video game to introduce a day-night cycle was Castlevania II: Simon's Quest on the NES in 1988. Under the veil of darkness, emboldened enemies became tougher to take down, and once welcoming townsfolk were replaced with famished zombies. Surviving through to dawn only took a few minutes, but it was always made to feel like sweet relief. Plenty of games include a day-night cycle, but most just use it as a technique of immersion. We can gaze up to admire a field of glittering stars in Skyrim, bask in the city lights and nightlife of Grand Theft Auto, or put our feet up over a warm campfire in Red Dead Redemption and listen to a tale or two.
The Mexicans roasted them alive, figuratively speaking. Red never forgot.
Atmosphere is a wonderful thing, but a more arresting use of Nightfall is when it goes from being atmospheric to absolutely deadly.
Minecraft is a great example of how a game can use the threat of oncoming darkness as a constant source of tension. You need to spend your daylight hours wisely if you're to stand a chance in hell of surviving through the night, building your defences to keep out those spawning creepers and skellies. Terraria offers the same threat, with Nightfall bringing zombies and flying eyeballs if you're still hanging around on the surface when the sun goes down. And if we cast our minds back to Ocarina of Time on the N64, those bony denizens of the dead were a pretty good incentive to finding safety inside the walls of a town at night.
The humble Game Boy Color also had its take on a day-night cycle with Pokemon Gold and Silver.
While they wouldn't exactly try to eat you, those elusive nocturnal Pokemon could only be found when poking around at night. It was the game's own internal clock that was tracking the time of day you chose to play.
Watching our game worlds transition to night and getting to experience the changes that take place really help us to believe in the reality of these fantastic worlds just that little bit more.
Dragon's Dogma has a nighttime that brings with it a different set of challenges.
3 heads.
Maintaining a healthy supply of lanterns is vital if you want to avoid some truly frightening creatures that are otherwise concealed by the cloak of darkness.
Some games exaggerate the dangers of Nightfall to a point where lingering just that moment too long can lead to a swift and gruesome demise.
In Gears of War, you are faced with the consequences of being eviscerated by flying beasts called Krill, unless you fought them off with high-powered beams of light or stayed under the reassuring warmth of lamplight. Alan Wake was similarly terrifying if you left the safety of illumination. Your misshapen enemies would writhe in the beam of your flashlight as you battled to make it to the next fresh stash of batteries. Fighting the darkness was something we'd already seen in older games like Alone in the Dark, but the way the darkness closed in around you in Alan Wake and those scary sounds was all the more suffocating. In the dark, with our vision crippled, a game's sound is made all the more powerful and persuasive.
It could be argued that the best use of nighttime in games is when it's neither purely atmospheric nor purely just a source of impending death.
It's when games skirt that fine line that we find ourselves in a truly spellbinding place, never really knowing what we're going to get.
Hello?
One of the best examples is, of course, DayZ. It's a game or mod that makes the cover of Darkness a whole new survival experience. You can barely see your polygonal hands in front of you, but you're reminded you're not alone by the moaning and groaning of those ever-persistent zombies.
That's a scary zombie.
You might be tempted to light a flare and bask in the safety of its glow until you realise you've just become a giant target that everyone can see. It can be tempting just to sit under a tree in the dark and rock back and forth, or even log off the server entirely. Stalker can be just as breathless. Like DayZ, you can barely see a thing, which raises the tension to an almost unbearable level. The likelihood of stumbling into trouble is always in the back of your mind as you try to make your way safely across the landscape, with only the misty light of the moon as your guide.
These experiences really get the survival instinct kicking in. Enduring the sunless spaces of these games can feel a bit like flirting with permadeath. Such as the trepidation you'll feel with each step. But it's not all spooks in the Stygian abyss. Most stealth games place you in the dark to be helpful. It just makes good sense.
A great example is Thief. Keeping a careful watch to ensure you were never too illuminated was the only way to avoid the gaze of patrolling guards, pouncing from pool to pool of inky darkness, listening carefully for footsteps, and dousing torchlight to keep your environments murky was a genuine thrill.
Someone behind me?
That's not to say you didn't sometimes find yourself cowering away from something that was sharing the dark with you.
Even when using the black of night as an ally, it's still hard to shake some of those nagging fears that have hung around since childhood. Not being able to see what you're most fearful of only makes things worse. We all know how powerful and overactive imagination can be when it's allowed to take over.